Hello, everybody. My name is Travis Bumgarner, and today I want to talk to you about the importance of storytelling in presentations. So, we will explore this idea in 8 acts. First, we'll start with the situation that gives rise to the need to tell a story. We will discuss some things to keep in mind before you begin this journey. Then, we will jump into the brainstorming, which we'll explore in 2 parts. First, in the divergent brainstorming, we'll go broad, and then the convergent brainstorming will bring it all back together. Then we'll figure out how to convert what we've done in the brainstorming process into a presentation. Then we will review and practice what we've created. Then we'll talk about some tips about how to present what you've done in this journey. And then we will talk about refining your craft between presentations and how you can improve your ability to storytell. Act 1, the situation. So let's play a little game of Mad Libs to discuss kind of this reason for storytelling. So if you can imagine, and you might have found yourself in this situation before, you did some awesome noun activity, and now you want to share the results so that you can achieve something. You spent a long duration doing this noun activity, but you only have a short duration to make your argument. And so I've been here often before, and the reason I'm giving this presentation today is because I've failed so many times at this Mad Libs game. And I think it's very important to achieve success with this Mad Libs. And so a situation I've often found myself in is I did some awesome user research, and now I want to share my results so that I can get my ideas implemented. I spent 2 months doing this research, but I only have my audience for 30 minutes to make my argument to them. So Act 2. Before you begin. So here are a few things to keep in mind as you begin to convey this Mad Libs to your audience. Number 1, you are the storyteller. So your goal is to create a great work of nonfiction that captivates the audience, keeps them focused, and gets them on board with your ideas. And so I like to think of this as like a train. So this train is going along and you're picking up your audience at the points where they need context, where they need to know what's going on. You put them on the train. You point them out the window to all the things that are happening, all the things that are going on, your story, what you've learned along the way, your research, all that good stuff. And eventually the train arrives to the station, which is your destination, which is your conclusion. And so in this whole journey, you are the storyteller. And I think this is very important to keep in mind. Number 2, who is the audience? Is it your team? Are they getting daily updates on the research that you're doing? Therefore, they might not need a very extravagant presentation. Is it some people in your company that you barely know? Is it a company all hands? Is it a presentation specifically to executives within your company? Who is your audience will drastically change the presentation that you give because you need to keep in mind the context that they have, the point you're trying to make, etc. Number 3, what do you want to achieve? So on the funner side, maybe you're just sharing some slides from a vacation and you want to let everyone know that going to Mexico is a fun time. On the other hand, are you trying to justify that your team desperately needs headcount? So how you convey what you want to achieve can change depending on what you want to achieve. So Act 3, divergent brainstorming. First, we'll start by going outwards before we come inwards, and we will do that through divergent brainstorming. So get your thoughts out. There are no dumb ideas. This is not the time to limit your creation, your creativity, your exploration of this concept of this story that you're trying to tell. And so get out there, explore all possible ways of conveying this information. Just beyond maybe a dumb idea might be a great idea, which might be the crux of your presentation. And you don't want to limit yourself in this step, in this phase of the presentation. Brainstorm both the content and presentation. The what of your presentation is as important as the how. And so if you have a really great idea, but you visually present it in a terrible way, that idea is dead. And so it's important to both think of the what you want to present and how you're going to present it in this process. Get away from your computer. Your computer is if we look at Microsoft Word, it's very left to right, top to bottom. PowerPoint kind of has a sequence and a structure of ideas flowing through in a presentation, and that's not very good for brainstorming. So for me in this period of storytelling, I like to get away from my computer. I like to get out sticky notes. I like to get out notebooks. I like to go for walks, for drives in the car. Just times where like there's no structure. It's very free flowing. You don't want to be structured. You don't want to be controlled, confined by a Word document or a PowerPoint presentation. So get away from the computer. Act 4, convergent brainstorming. So now it's time to take all those ideas that are all over the place and bring them together into a cohesive story that you want to tell. So we're going to do this in 2 phases. First, we're going to cluster ideas into themes, and then we're going to weave those themes into a story. And so if we take 2 whiteboards that I've had for doing presentations, which we see here, you can see that there are sticky notes that have been clustered, and then there are arrows that join those ideas together. And if you look actually on the second photo, you'll see in the top right corner, that's actually me brainstorming how I want to present this information to the audience. And so now we're bringing things together, we're organizing it, we're structuring it, we're picking the important things, we're picking how we want to display it. And this is what this process is about. Establish as much shared context as needed. So if we think back to when I was talking about this train, we want to be mindful that we already know everything about what we're talking about. The audience knows nothing. We've had 2 months to prepare. They had 30 minutes to receive this information. And so you want to appeal to your audience. You want to pick them up, if you could think of at like the train stops, the train stations that are appropriate for them. And you want to pick them up, you want to put them on the train, and you want to keep them involved and included and help them understand your journey as you go along. So pointing out the window at the things that are relevant to them, etc. And you want to make sure that everyone is along for the journey together. You want to make sure that no one gets lost on this train ride. Do one thing and do it well. So at one point in my career, I wanted to make a case for this idea of prototyping to learn. And this idea involved engineers on the more technical side. And then on the product side, it involved product managers and designers. And I could have just made one big presentation that appealed to everybody, but I would have lost, or I would not have given the best presentation I could have given to this audience. And so instead of just making one kind of mediocre presentation for everybody, I split it up and I gave one presentation to the engineers and a separate presentation to the product and design folks. And I told both of them that they wanted to learn about the opposite side. Here are the recordings. This is where you can go to get this information. But I wanted to make these presentations that did one thing, did it well for the specific audience that I had. Remove weak themes. So ask yourself, as you have these themes, if you think back to the photos that I shared of my whiteboard, does this theme, does it add to my story and the argument that I'm trying to make? And if not, get rid of it. But don't go too far though, because we need to keep in mind that storytelling is connecting one thing to the next. And if you remove a theme that connects 2 other themes together, then the audience is lost. On that train, it's like removing some of the tracks. They know where they're coming from and where they're going to, but there's no connector to bring them through. And so you want to make sure it's this cohesive journey that your audience is on. Avoid tangents, but leave breadcrumbs. So if we think about continuing with this train metaphor, that a train is going along this track, and this is the story that you're trying to tell from beginning to conclusion. And there are some ways that the train could take different tracks to go to different conclusions, but you've decided not to go that route. And so what you want to do is convey to your audience that, yes, I know this thing inside and out. I've explored what's down that track. That's not the way we want to go. If you want to have a meeting, follow-up meeting, we could discuss what lies down that track, but I don't think that is the best way to go. And so you want to convey, I know this thing inside and out, and this is the way we're going. You don't want to leave doubt in your audience. So avoid tangents, but leave breadcrumbs. Act 5, presentation creation. So before we jump in, I'm going to do a quick little tangent. The following slides focus on presentation creation, either like PowerPoint slides or in Google, but it's also, there are other opportunities in your life to give presentations, whether it is through a Zoom call, a Slack message, writing emails, etc. All of the things that we cover in the following slides apply to all those situations as well. Be consistent in tone, theme, formatting, etc. So as the storyteller, your presentation should flow and should not be distracting. And I'd like to think of this presentation as kind of an example where a color corresponds to a segment of the presentation. It gives an intro slide like Act 1, and this is what we're going to explore in Act 1, and then we dive in. And you don't want your audience kind of thinking about your presentation. You want to get them immersed in the story. And you can do that more efficiently by being consistent in your tone, theme, formatting, etc. Choose the best visual for each presentation. So if we take the next slide as an example, avoid walls of text. And I recommend avoiding walls of text because if you have a wall of text up, that tells one story, and then you're speaking out loud with a different story. And I don't know if you've ever noticed, but if you get a wall of text, you stop listening to the speaker, you start reading the wall of text, and now the speaker's saying one thing, and you're consuming a different thing. And so if you have a wall of text, you get this split in your story where your audience is getting something separate from what you're saying. So avoid walls of text. Aggressively prune slides. So for me, I keep kind of like a recycle bin section of my presentation. It's usually the end of my presentation where I'll keep slides that I think are maybe not the best way to convey a piece of information. And if I want to return to them, I can find them kind of in my recycle bin, and they're there. And eventually, before I get my presentation, I'll prune them, but it's good to have just in case you want to go back to an idea that you had explored and decided was the better way of conveying a piece of information. Act 6, review and practice. Make sure the story flows. So a story consists of various parts with an intro, with a conflict, with a conclusion, and all that good stuff. And you want to make sure that it flows from the beginning to the end, this train track that I keep talking about, this train that you're on. And a great way to make sure that this train is going along this track of the story that you're trying to tell is by practice, practice, practice. So know what you're going to say. You spend all this time doing the work, and then you spend all this time preparing the presentation. And then if you don't do the practice, then you're just really shooting yourself in the foot. So do a dry run. For me, the first time I give a presentation, it is terrible. I've given this presentation now that you're hearing me talk about probably 8 times. 1 in front of an audience, and then I've practiced like 7 more times. The first time I gave it, I definitely didn't know what I sounded like. I knew what I was talking about. And so it's important to practice, practice, practice when you're giving a presentation. Seek feedback. So find the people that you would have the hardest time keeping on your train, on the track going forward, and find out like why your presentation doesn't work for them. So I once gave an all hands at a company presentation on security, and I found a person that didn't know so much about security, didn't know so much about technology, and I gave them a presentation to them, and they pointed out some shortcomings in my presentation about how I wasn't appealing to that part of my audience, and I went back and I corrected it and made sure that my presentation on security appealed to the entire company. And I couldn't have done that without seeking feedback. Act 7, present. Get there early and prepare. So know that you can be heard, that you can be seen, and that your screen share is working, and any other technical things you need to figure out beforehand. Get the presentation all set up and ready. Don't be that person that's last minute plugging in an HDMI cable and a whatever, what you might have it, and their presentation doesn't run technically well, is not smooth. Get there early and prepare. Breathe. This is your time to shine. Take your time. Breathe, get ready, go for it. Correct yourself if you mess up. This is perhaps a more advanced technique, but as I've given more presentations, I've gotten to this place where I can speak out loud, hear myself, and then kind of correct myself as I'm going. And I think this is a great skill, especially like, for example, if I use some very specific, peculiar vocabulary that I don't think the audience will understand. If I'm listening to myself real time and kind of checking myself, I can adjust my vocabulary so that they will not derail off the track and will stay on the train and will come with me to the conclusion that I want to make. Be yourself and have fun. That's all I got to say on that slide. Act 8, refining your craft. Find inspiration from others. So I love to watch presentations and I love learning all that goodness on YouTube at conferences and things like that. And if I find a presentation that particularly is very educational, resonates with me, which like is designed very well, I'll take note and I'll use that in a future presentation. Experiment when the stakes are high. So when I originally gave this presentation, it was just as like a fun way to get to know coworkers and share information with them. And it wasn't super critical to like make a justification to hire execs for headcount. And since the stakes were not high, I experimented. And I think this deck turned out pretty well. I've had some other decks that have turned out pretty horribly, pretty ugly. And it wasn't so important because the stakes were low. And I still got the information that I wanted to share out. But you don't want to gamble and do that kind of thing when the stakes are high. So experiment when the stakes aren't high so that you can improve your craft. Learn a little about design. So this might just be me, but as I try to make presentations, I want to make them aesthetically pleasing with spacing, positioning, coloring, fonts, all that good stuff. Our brains get used to patterns, get used to styling and that kind of thing. And so like if you pick something that is designed well, your audience kind of forgets about it. And I say this in a good way of they're not spending mental energy processing the format of your slides. They're just coming along with you with your story. They're like just brought in. I wouldn't say they're hypnotized, but like they're not like, imagine a slide you probably can think back to where it's like either a wall of text or like one slide the text is in the top left corner and the next slide it's in the bottom right, and your brain's just like freaking out trying to process it, and you're like, this is very unorganized. But with a little bit of design, it's kind of like you bring them, you immerse them in your story, and you bring them along, and they're not getting distracted by your terrible slide design. So I would recommend learning a little bit about design. Lastly, seek feedback afterwards. So if you got some feedback from me, please pass it along. And if you ever want help with your presentation, feel free to reach out. I love offering feedback and helping others improve their craft. So on that note, I will say, look, if you had some slides in a Google presentation to seize everything you ever wanted in one meeting, would you capture it or would you just let it slip? Thank you very much for joining me today. That is my exploration into storytelling. The end.